Before Lizabeth Scott became one of film noir's most unforgettable faces, she was Emma Matzo, a Scranton girl growing up above a neighborhood grocery store. And the house where that story began is still standing. Not abandoned, not boarded up, restored, occupied, and surrounded by the same Scranton neighborhood that helped shape the woman Hollywood later packaged as mysterious, dangerous, and impossible to know. She would work opposite Humphrey Bogart, Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, Robert Mitchum, and Elvis Presley. She would become famous for her smoky voice, her sculpted features, and the woman who always seemed to be hiding something. But the real story begins much earlier. It begins in Pine Brook. Lizabeth Scott was born Emma Virginia Matzo in Scranton in 1922, the oldest of 6 children born to John Matzo and Mary Penyak. Her families were Rusyn immigrants, Carpatha Rusyn, not Russian. That distinction matters. Rusyn people come from the Carpathian region of Eastern Europe, and their identity is often flattened or misunderstood in American records. The Matzo family lived in Scranton's Pine Brook section, where John operated Matzo Market. Their family home combined home and business, a family residence above their neighborhood grocery store with customers coming and going at street level. This was not the glamorous Hollywood childhood that later publicity might have invented. This was a working-class family in a working-class city during the Depression, raising 6 children and making a life through a small business. And today, when you look at the house, it's important to correct an outdated image. Some articles and later accounts describe the property as boarded up or abandoned. It is neither. The house has been restored, it is occupied, and it brings us back to a real place, not a ruin, not a ghost story, but a living part of Scranton's history. Scott attended Marywood Seminary, a local Catholic girls' school, before transferring to Scranton Central High School. She acted in school plays, and by all accounts, she had already begun to understand that performance was not just something she enjoyed. It was something she could do. But being strikingly beautiful as a teenager did not make life simple. Scott did have friends while growing up. This was not a story of a girl completely isolated from everyone around her. But alongside those friendships came ridicule, gossip, and innuendo. She developed early, and her appearance drew attention from boys and men that she had not asked for. Some of the girls around her resented that attention. Jealousy rarely announces itself honestly. It arrives as a joke, a whisper, a nickname, or a story repeated just loudly enough for the person at the center of it to hear. Her family background gave people another excuse. The Matzo name, her parents' immigrant identity, their accents, and the fact that the family was Rusyn all made her seem different in a city where difference could quickly become neighborhood gossip. That combination, beauty, ambition, and outsider status, would follow her. First through Scranton, then through New York, and eventually through Hollywood. After graduating, Scott worked with the Mae Desmond Players and at the Barter Theater in Virginia. Then, with the support of her father, she left for New York as a teenager to study acting. After reading Maxwell Anderson's play, Mary of Scotland, a play about Mary Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth I, she gave herself the stage name Elizabeth Scott, later dropping the E. Her first professional breakthrough came with the touring company of Hell's a Poppin'. The production traveled through 63 American cities, giving Scott the kind of practical education no classroom could provide. She later appeared in the New York theater world and was cast as the understudy to Tallulah Bankhead in Thornton Wilder's The Skin of Our Teeth. Bankhead was the star. Scott was the young woman waiting backstage. And waiting. Bankhead reportedly never missed a performance, meaning Scott rarely got the opportunity to play the role she had prepared for. But Scott eventually did take the stage, and her performance attracted attention. In a 1996 interview, Scott remembered being ambitious, reticent, and introverted, but also intensely determined. She said her ambition was to be a great stage actress. Hollywood was not the dream. It was a detour. That detour began when her modeling photographs appeared in Harper's Bazaar magazine. Agent Charles Feldman noticed them and invited her to Los Angeles. She arrived at the Beverly Hills Hotel and waited. Days passed, then more days. No one called. Finally, Scott called Feldman herself. Screen tests were arranged, and she was handed pages of dialogue to learn almost overnight. The test did not impress Jack Warner. He reportedly dismissed her as a second lead. But Hal Wallace saw something different. Wallace eventually signed Scott, and Hollywood began building a persona around her. She became blonde, husky-voiced, aloof, and alluring. Paramount reportedly promoted her as the Threat, a kind of answer to Lauren Bacall and Veronica Lake. But comparisons to other actresses were one of the burdens of Scott's career. She was constantly described as someone else's version of something. A second Bacall, a darker Lake, a less famous rival. Scott herself understood the machinery, and in that 1996 interview, she said she fell in love with the camera and that the lens seemed to love her back. Her first film was You Came Along in 1945. Then came The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, Dead Reckoning, Desert Fury, I Walk Alone, Pitfall, Too Late for Tears, and Dark City. She appeared in 22 feature films, and most of them were connected to film noir or its darker relatives. Her characters were rarely simple victims. They were nightclub singers, fashion models, desperate women, dangerous women, women who had made one bad choice and then discovered that the next choice was worse. In I Walk Alone, Burt Lancaster looks at her character and assumes that beauty should equal goodness. He is wrong. That was the Scott formula. Let the audience look at the face, then make them question everything behind it. And then there was the rumor about All About Eve. The 1950 film follows Eve Harrington, a young actress who enters the orbit of an established star, Margot Channing, and gradually threatens to replace her. The story became one of Hollywood's most famous portraits of ambition, betrayal, and theatrical rivalry. A Hollywood legend claimed that Mary Orr's story, and eventually the film, was inspired by the relationship between Tallulah Bankhead and her young understudy, Lizabeth Scott. It's a compelling story. It's also not established fact. Other accounts connect the origins of The Wisdom of Eve to actress Elizabeth Bergner and her assistant, Martina Lawrence. Still, the Scott Bankhead version refused to disappear. Why? Because it fit the Hollywood mythology perfectly. The powerful older star, the beautiful young understudy, the resentment backstage, and the fear that a newcomer might take everything. Scott was never proven to be the real Eve Harrington, but the rumor shows how quickly her life was turned into a story other people wanted to tell. In the 1950s, that pattern became much more damaging. The tabloid magazine Confidential published a story about Scott that insinuated sexual impropriety and linked her to Hollywood's underground lesbian scene. Confidential was the TMZ of its day, but far more vicious. The article used her unmarried status, her private personality, and her refusal to behave like a conventional Hollywood star as evidence of something scandalous. That is how gossip works when it wants to look like journalism. It takes a woman's privacy and presents it as proof that she has something to hide. Scott sued the magazine for libel. Her legal team sought $2.5 million, arguing that the story subjected her to contempt and ridicule. The case became a major public spectacle, but it did not give Scott the clean victory she deserved. Accounts differ on the precise legal outcome, describing a mistrial, dismissal, or private settlement. What is clear is that the episode followed her, and it came at a moment when film noir was already losing its place in Hollywood. The scandal did not single-handedly end her career. Her career was already changing, but it intensified the pressures surrounding her. Scott never liked the Hollywood social machine. She disliked premieres, disliked being stared at, and resisted the gossip columnists who expected actresses to perform their private lives in public. After the Confidential episode, that resistance became even stronger. Scott continued working into the 1950s and 1960s. She appeared opposite Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis in Scared Stiff. She worked with Elvis Presley in Loving You. She signed with Vic Records, and Scott recorded an album with Henri René and his orchestra in Hollywood in October 1957. Simply titled Lizabeth, the 12 tracks are a mixture of torch songs and playful romantic ballads, and in April 1958, Scott made her public singing debut on CBS's The Big Record. Her final credit film appearance came in Pulp in 1972, a strange, late-career connection to the very noir world that had defined her. But Scott gradually stepped away. She remained in Los Angeles, invested in real estate, supported charitable causes, read widely, studied philosophy and languages, and kept her personal life carefully controlled. Because of this, the press labeled her a mystery, a hermit, a tragic figure. But those who knew her said she wasn't hiding from the world. She was just living on her own terms. In her 1996 interview, she described herself as a severe introvert. She said premieres were painful because of the adulation and the sensation of strangers staring at her. That may sound surprising for a woman whose career depended upon being watched. But that contradiction explains much of Lizabeth Scott. She loved acting. She loved the lens. She did not necessarily love fame. One of her most revealing thoughts was that she loved not having the eyes of the world on her. Her dream, she said, was to be alone, close the apartment doors, and not answer the phone. That was not an act. That was a boundary. When she passed away in 2015 at the age of 92, she left behind a legacy as one of the most definitive faces of film noir. Lizabeth Scott's story is not simply that a beautiful girl escaped Scranton and became a movie star. It is that Scranton gave Hollywood a woman who refused to be easily explained. She came from a large Rusyn immigrant family. She grew up in a neighborhood market. She knew what it meant to be noticed, judged, envied, and misunderstood. Then Hollywood took those same qualities and turned them into a brand. Her beauty became danger. Her quietness became mystery. Her privacy became scandal. And her ambition became threat. But beneath it all was a serious actress who had originally wanted the stage, who worked constantly, who prepared intensely, and who understood the emotional darkness at the center of film noir. She once explained that film noir felt modern because it moved away from simple stories where boy meets girl, boy marries girl, and everybody rides into the sunset. These films explore psychology, fear, desire, guilt, and compromise. In other words, reality. And perhaps that's why Scott's work continues to find new viewers, decades later. She never looked entirely comfortable inside the world around her. That discomfort became her power. The house and the neighborhood where Emma Matzo grew up is still here. The grocery store is gone, but the story remains. Hollywood tried to turn Lizabeth Scott into a fantasy. Scranton remembers the person. I'm Miss Scranton, and this has been All Roads Lead to Scranton. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our playlist, The Scranton to Hollywood Pipeline. And remember, no matter where you're watching from, all roads lead right back here.